Hello, folks, and welcome to episode 12 of the Prospectus series. This week, looking at ecology. So, starting off with what ecology covers. So, the scope of ecology as a whole is it covers the plethora of living and non-living elements in the environment. So, that's both flora and fauna, and the other areas of the environment. So, more physical geography, such as looking at how those living organisms interact with the rivers, the rocks, uh, the air around their environment. So how they interact, what effects that has on the animal, what effects that has on the plant, and ultimately how that ecosystem uh, comes together and has a synergy within itself. So it's both the study of that and, in some cases, the conservation of that. Whilst not specifically focusing on conservation, the study of the changing ecological environment is a big area for this particular topic. So it's highlighting how our natural world is in its current shape and form, as well as how historically what it has been and where it is potentially going with these different changes that are happening in the environment, whether that be positive changes or negative changes to that environment. So, in terms of who this degree is for, so primarily it's for those who are interested in studying the animal in its given environment, as well as if you're interested in the living world as a general rule. So, if you're interested in studying the plant life, studying how they interact with each other, but are potentially more flexible than just looking down the study of wildlife, where you focus more on the animal itself, or the study of conservation in general, where you are focusing on actually sustaining that environment or sustaining that type of environment going forward. Ecology is more how these interactions all exist, so it's more of a generalist degree, but as a general rule of thumb, this degree will certainly fit those who have an interest in working with a variety of different organizations and industries and potentially helping shape those industries so they're more sustainable going forward. As well as this, one of the key elements that is normally part of the ecology degree is the understanding that some of the living world is heavily impacted by stakeholders, and understanding how to particularly interact with these stakeholders is crucial. So, what the relationship is with other species and what our impact on those species are. So, by introducing different animal species or plant species to that environment, what impact have we had, whether it be an intentional introduction like the red and grey squirrels in the UK, or an unintentional introduction such as Japanese knotweed in the rural urban environments, and how we control that particular plant. So in terms of why you should be interested, so these are the type of fields that different people can go into. So you're looking at the rural economy again, but whereas the study of agriculture and the study of realm was focused more on business elements, this is more focused on the rural economy and the rural infrastructure or equally the urban infrastructure and how they interact with the animals and living worlds there. So anyone who's interested in conservation, in agriculture, in the study of that environment and the study of the animals that live in these environments. It's keeping your options open though, so keeping yourself as a generalist rather than focusing on particular niche areas in your BSc or your bachelor's degree. So rather than focusing initially on the study of one particular species or one particular environment, it keeps you more of a rounded general individual. So as with my other videos, some of the top 3 universities to go with. So starting off the list is Nottingham Trent, so their ecology and conservation bachelor's degree. Bournemouth University's ecology and wildlife conservation degree, and Aberystwyth University ecology degree with with their sandwich year, so with a year in industry. Bournemouth and Nottingham Trent also have years in industry, and with universities progression and preparing you for the job market, it's so crucial at this stage to make the most of these placement years, make the most of these years in industry to give you an idea or a feel for the job market, both what you enjoy, what you don't, what you might not enjoy, but what you're interested in, how it builds your rounded skill set as a whole, from an academic point of view and from a professional point of view as well. So in terms of looking at Nottingham Trent University, at the start it looks at the broader elements of the degree as a whole. So it looks at ecology in a general context, looking at how those interactions between living and non-living environments or organisms in that environment interlink together. So what effects the environment has on the animal and the plants, and what effects the plants have on the environment, and vice versa. So what it's teaching you at that point is how the ecosystems form, how the ecosystems change, and how the organisms in that environment adapt to that changing ecosystem, whether that be positive changes or negative changes, such as when animals go extinct and so on. When you also have to take into account of how you are going to practically assess and research this, which is where Nottingham Trent looks at developing that practical ecologist in you. So it's shaping your practical conservation skills and teaching you about ecology in a practical setting to give you that foundation of the practical application as well as the academic theory lessons. Now, year two, it looks more at how to work the environment, how to utilize that environment, and what benefit that environment has effectively on the animals and the plants in that setting. So it's looking at what effects you can have on that environment which are positive, how you can minimize the use of certain products in that environment, whether it be agriculture, whether it be general business and industry, and how you potentially start that fundamental point of an ecologist who works in partnership with the stakeholders in that environment, and how you interlink both the caring and the compassionate side for the environment and potentially the business side of understanding how stakeholders are going to be aiming to make or maximize their profit from that environment. So as well as this, one of the key points is making sure that you know how to monitor the environment, any changes, such as what factors you have to take into account when assessing the needs of the environment or the ecosystem, and making sure that you are at the forefront of that legal knowledge, so you are aware of what legal parameters businesses have to work within, and make sure that you are able to keep that business or hold that business to account so that the businesses stay within the factors of the law. Now, year three, placement year. So this is a full industrial year in industry. This is, again, something that you should capitalize on. Work for organizations which are going to be your primary employers at one point. So you've got to really capitalize on most of that opportunity for that academic year. Now, in year four, as with any other bachelor's degree, you're going to be doing a dissertation, so a year-long project. But importantly, to distinguish Nottingham Trent, they look at how you are going to shape that broader ecological degree or ecological project that you're studying, whether it be a practical or academic setting, and picking different elective modules that might shape or benefit that form of academic study. Is it going to be more looking at marine, or is it going to be looking at more the terrestrial land-based industries like farming? Now, at this point, when you're looking at elective modules, it's looking at elements that you aren't going to get elsewhere in your career. So not necessarily what might appeal to you from the end result of your career. It's more thinking what skills and experience are you going to be able to take from those modules. So what elements are you going to be able to include? How is it going to make you more flexible going forward? So Bournemouth University, again, similar to Nottingham Trent, it's starting to try to establish you as an academic and practical ecologist, so teaching you those fundamental skills that build those understandings or that insight into the living world. So how those ecosystems are formed, shaped, and what effects different elements have on those ecosystems, whether it be the flora, the fauna, or the environment as a whole. So on top of this, they're teaching you general ecological skills and conservation skills specifically, so teaching you how to apply that theoretical knowledge into a practical context and looking at how you can safeguard different endangered species or wildlife in that particular context, so how you can apply the ecological knowledge to conservation. Now, this is something where it does slightly different than Nottingham Trent, which was looking at more general perspective or the potentially business perspective of working with that environment. This is looking at more of applying this directly to conservation or the wildlife setting as a whole. So learning through field excursions with particular endangered or vulnerable animals. So particularly looking at UK species, so your hedgehogs, your badgers for an example, and particularly highlighting the red squirrel at this point. Now, in year two, they look more at how the different advances in the field or advancements in the field have shaped the study of ecology. So, what has been the areas which have developed our knowledge of the natural world from different research that's been conducted. If you think of how far we've come from a research point of view, or even from media content that's been put out recently, if you compare historic or archived footage of documentaries looking at particular examples such as the Blue Planet series and how our knowledge of how plastics are having an impact on the oceans, and think about that from a context of how we're having a greater understanding of the natural environment. Now, on top of this, you also have to think about starting to take the perspective of what type of ecologist you want to be. So, whereas they look at animal evolution, plant evolution, and how the mechanisms of change have affected the animals and the plants in their environments, it's also giving you options to pick different modules in semesterized variants. So that's where you're doing bite-sized chunks of these different modules in an autumn term, a winter term, and in spring and summer. So it's giving you that option of being able to pick the modules that effectively suit the type of ecologist you want to be. Do you want to learn more about the academic context, or do you want to apply this more to a theoretical context? In terms of, are you going to come up with different techniques rather than research, or are you going to go practical and apply yourself as a general ecologist, or potentially specialize in a given environment and base your studies in that particular environmental setting, such as marine biology? Now, again, year three, a placement year. Again, make the most of the opportunities that are around you and available to you. So now year four, slightly different than Nottingham Trent. They're looking at more refining the type of ecologist you want to be. So if you have an idea of the type of ecologist you want to be, and you have an idea of optional modules that you particularly want to pursue and study, it might be that Bournemouth University's degree program, where you've got that greater flexibility of whether you want to pursue agri-food, marine biology, whether you want to delve deeper into a particular element, such as terrestrial ecology or even particular conservation examples. If you have your field already in mind, then pursue those topic areas as a point and focus on those particular areas. Now, final university on the list is Aberystwyth University, which again is, as with the other two universities, their year one program looks more at giving you the formulation of what a practical ecologist and theoretical ecologist is. But equally, their specialism looks more at the scientific units, so looking more in depth at some of the organisms that the other two degrees might not have focused on, which are your microbes and your microorganisms. So looking at that microscopic environment as well as the visible world and the environment that we regularly see. So it does target specific habitats as well, but the main thing that stands out to me at this point is the interest in the microorganisms in that environment and how these microbes can potentially shape the environment, and particularly when you're thinking about marine studies, looking at zooplankton and so on, and understanding how they interact and how they build up that initial food web. So it's the food web element that the year one at Aberystwyth is really bringing together, so as you understand the broader perspective of food chains and food webs. Year two looks more at the environmental landscape, so a bit more similar to what year one and year one at Nottingham Trent and Bournemouth University addressed. But again, the main difference that this offers is looking at different influences in the environment. So stakeholder engagement. Aber's, for example, got very developed farming sector. So again, they're looking at the agri-food and food sector's impact on the environment, as well as looking at the marine access areas that they have readily available to them and making use of the coastline. Now, the main thing that you've got to think about in this context is, again, you can focus on different environmental specialisms, whether it be overseas in places like Africa, whether it be Arctic studies, which is a particularly unique offering that they have available to you. And the other thing that you have to bear in mind with this type of degree is you're picking areas that should shape the type of ecologist you want to be. So where do you want to work? Although a module might be particularly interesting, it's thinking how that's going to shape you. If you want to work with more Arctic species in zoos, then pursue an Arctic specialism. But if your plan is to stay in the UK mainland and that's your career goal, then it might be better to look at the optional units that reflect or refine the native UK habitat more so. Again, whereas the other two universities have have a mandatory placement year, Aber's is optional. However, I strongly advise that you would take this because it gives you that broader refinement of your degree cohorts, or shapes that degree to better develop your university offering in terms of how you stand out to an employer. Now, in year four, where Aber distinguishes itself is it looks more at the sustainability sector. So it looks more at how humans positively or negatively impact the environment and how to make our impact more manageable on the environment. So in terms of sustainable areas, it begins to look at the renewable energy sector and looking at different elements of how we can improve this and have a more mitigated impact on the environment. So alongside this is understanding how we can actively manage the population. So if you're someone who is interested in some of the herbivores in the UK, such as deer population, and interested in how we actively manage herbivores when there's at the moment no apex predators to manage that environment, then it's perhaps an area where you can specialize in, and develop it. The other elements, again, it gives you more specialisms to focus on. Are you focusing more on conservation, practical ecology, or are you looking at working it with different stakeholders and being more industry related at this point? So in terms of the differences, so Nottingham Trent, main thing that stands out for me with Nottingham Trent is they do have a range of different field trips or field excursions that you have available to you. The other thing to bear in mind is Nottingham Trent is in a large metropolitan area, so the city is very well developed. So in terms of giving you that access to rural, urban, and seeing that type of change, if that is something that you're more interested in, and you're looking at how UK cities are developing and the changes that might have on the animal, and that might be something that you should pursue. However, do bear in mind Nottingham Trent is also landlocked. So although it has the Brackenhurst campus does have access to a range of different areas for you to work with and study, it is landlocked. So if you're interested in marine, then both Bournemouth and Aber have more access to the coastal environments than Nottingham Trent does. Now, Bournemouth is, its distinction, generally speaking, is looking more at those core skills in terms of those practical skills, making use of extensive field work and practical elements, so making use of a range of different habitats. But the main thing Bournemouth is trying to provide you with, it doesn't necessarily give you the straightforward structure that Nottingham Trent does, but it does give you that flexibility of picking your own degree effectively. But that then puts the onus on you to design and distinguish yourself in your own degree context, picking the modules that best work and suit you. So effectively, the members of your peer group can be completely different from yourself in terms of what their degree looks like. Now, Aber again has a very different, varied environment, so it sits between different national parks and has a vast coastal offering for those who are interested in more the marine side of it. Again, if you're looking for a mixture between the two, between Bournemouth and Nottingham Trent, that Aber might be for you. It gives you some more optional units than Nottingham Trent does, but Bournemouth, Aber doesn't go quite as far. Bournemouth with giving you that full flexibility of what units to pick, and it gives you a bit more scope for the university to steer you in the direction that it thinks an ecologist should have core elements to, whereas Bournemouth steers you again more towards that flexible option where you pick your own direction and your own career goal. Or, as you can imagine, the rural industries, those rural businesses or charities, which are these can be your large charities or international charities like RSPB, WWF, where they manage large reserves or work with various local and national partners. Also, as well, in the case of WWF, working internationally as well. Or it could be working with landowners, working with farmers, working with the National Trust, managing country estates similar to what the Realm degree specialised in, but more from a conservation and animal focus over the business focus. Or you might decide you're going to specialise, you're going to pursue a different project, conserve a different animal species that you're really interested in, and work in zoos or work with local groups or a different conservation organisation that's local to you. Or maybe you decide you're going to go and have more of an impact with stakeholders and work with local government or other organisations or academic institutions and have an impact that way. It's very much your decision at this point because, again, the degree is very generalised and gives you that flexibility. However, something to bear in mind is, although ecology is the title of the vast majority of these degrees, there are also other degree options which are similar, such as wildlife conservation, although not quite meeting all the requirements that an ecology degree does meet or does fit. Wildlife conservation is broadly very similar, and it's something else that you can look at if you're trying to decide on your 5 UCAS choices. Now, the next video is looking at wildlife management, environmental topics, managing the land from a both agricultural and conservation focus, as well as making sure that you're aware of how to work with different wildlife species, taking similar points from ecology, but giving you the other degree options that are available to you as well.